Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I'm talking about Battle of the Sexes 2 and we're one season away with ending Era 1. And my overall opinions on this season is that on paper it has a good cast, but in actuality and in action, they were all just heavily disappointing. One of the reasons for that is just due to the format not being good. They went back to non-eliminations, despite the eliminations being the last two seasons very interesting. And even compared to the first Battle of the Sexes, they got rid of the scoreboard, so it's kind of hard to tell who's doing well and who's not doing well. I can definitely see how some of the people, especially the men like Eric and Mark, kind of use that to their advantage so they can manipulate things to their favor. Just in general, I think even compared to the first Battle of the Sexes, this season's cast was weaker, there wasn't as much dynamic personalities, and even the dynamic personalities that were on the season were pretty much shells of their former selves. I think by this point in time, they're kind of just using the show to fuel their bar tour and college tour careers, I guess. So, like the 2000s version of influencers, Eric came in with this huge skipping rope brand deal that got very annoying that he tried to shove in everyone's faces. And you could definitely tell that this group of people was kind of running on fumes, though a lot of the people who are on the Gauntlet and the Inferno were not on either Battle of the Sexes season, so a lot of people who were on the first Battle of the Sexes weren't on the following two, and they are on this season. And I just think the Battle of the Sexes crew just wasn't nearly as interesting. The men's strategy, yet again, was very boring. It was mainly just solely on performance, which really wasn't interesting the first time, and it's less interesting here. And while the girls had some sort of drama and conflict, it was nowhere near as interesting as it was on the first season. And honestly, just thinking about the season doesn't really have many memorable moments. It's just really a shame that they decided to go to a format that was very old and ancient by this point in time, and they regressed instead of progressed. The location of New Mexico was kind of interesting. The challenges really weren't that notable, though some of them would become staples in the future. And this was around the time, I believe this was the last time that Road Rules had a new cast, so this is kind of the end of the Road Rules feature show. And if I remember correctly, I think this is the last season that was a real world versus Road Rules season, as the teams that were in the future seasons were different. So we're kind of approaching an end of an era here. It's watchable enough, especially compared to a lot of the 30 seasons that are just as boring, but the seasons nowhere near as long. But in general, you're not getting much of anything from this specific season. Season is in New Mexico, where there are 36 people in the house, which will go down to 12 in the end. Actually, no, I think it will go down to 6. My bad. 3 men and 3 women at the end, so 30 people are going to get the boot before the final. Instead of the inner circle being deemed by performance, the team will end up choosing the 3 leaders who will form the inner circle and they will boot someone. Jack's Jack is tired of the old people running the season, and even Derek mentions that people who have ties to one another tend to control things. Cynthia is a mother since her last time on the show, though technically the first season wasn't a part of the challenge yet, and we learn that Kitty and Veronica are on fine terms with one another, and this will be the first season where Coral and Mike are on opposite teams. There is a separation between the newer woman and the older woman, and Rachel is rubbing the newer woman the wrong way, and Tanya wants to actually prove something this season, since she's been underwhelming on her last 2 seasons. The guys decide that one person will speak when they have some jumping rope, which is apparently Eric's sponsorship thing, where he was sponsoring some skipping rope and he wanted to promote it. So this is how they decided to do it. And pretty much the guys use the same strategy that they used on the first Battle of the Sexes. And of course, it's Eric and Mark who implemented the strategy here since it works out best for them, but the others don't realize that it's not going to work out for them, and that Eric and Mark are just covering their own asses. We also see that Derek is rubbing a lot of the guys the wrong way, and we see him start to drink a lot, which guys like Eric sees as a problem, since it's all about a performance. The issue with many of the men here is that they're forgetting that this is a show. And Derek ends up making friends with a frog. And it's interesting that this is how Derek starts out, since he's kind of just known as being the background character to some of the bigger egotistical guys, especially in Era 2. Dangle Drop is the first challenge where they have to hold onto the punching bags where they are being held up by a metal contraption up in the air. Abram, Adam, and Eric are the leader of the guys, and Genesis, Rachel, and Tina are the leaders for the women, where if your team wins, the leaders are safe and chooses who goes on your team, but if you lose, one of the three leaders of the team will be booted that round. Genesis does not trust Rachel, Cole, and Veronica, and it's probably because they're the most experienced, and Angela also has some conflict with Rachel. The challenge here has been used in some other competitions, mainly Big Brother, as we see in Big Brother 13. So it's kind of a reality TV staple. Derek starts to win over his teammates by his performance, and we see Abram, Rachel, and Coral winning the other three matches. Rachel points out that herself and Coral didn't have the time to reset and rest to do the final round compared to the guys because the men went before the women, but the men end up winning the challenge, meaning that Rachel, Tina, and Genesis are in danger of going home. Mike is worried about going home because he DQ'd, and the men talk about how Jackie's dropped first, so he needs to go. And this DQ that Mike had in the very beginning will haunt him for the rest of his time on this season. The girls' meeting is more messy because there are two sides, and Angel is pushing for Rachel to go, though some of the women feel like Rachel should be safe because she performed well. Though the others, like Tina and Genesis, or at least compared to the others, though Ayana is also pushing that Tina is a better performer than Genesis. So Genesis should go in Ayana's eyes. There's some bickering with the women, though it's really not that interesting, and I think Cameron mentions that some of them are only here for the fun and to party, and it just shows the mentality of some of the newer women of the game, where they see this as a summer house, and it's not something that should be taken seriously, and they're in the wrong house, since even in the earlier seasons, a lot of them were there to play and to win. Jacquees and Genesis are voted out of the house. Angela is crying because she feels that she's on the bottom for calling out Rachel, and some of the other women, like Sophia, are siding with the other newbies. Veronica and Coral want Angela on next, though Ayana and Tanya decide to steal one of the boys' chairs, which was a pretty fun moment, where Abram ends up taking one of the girls' toilet seat heads. Genesis volunteered to be a leader because no one else did, and seeing the instant realization that she made a mistake was a decent little arc for her. She didn't really have a chance to do anything on the season, and I do see why this was her last season, though she was apparently an alternate for All Stars 4. I have nothing to say about Jacquees. He talked about being one of the better new guys and flopped immediately, not shocked that he didn't return at all. Rum and Coral are getting really close to one another, and some people do find it a bit weird. And we are being told and shown that Ace is the life of the party, and he's streaking and slapping himself. And we see a makeout session between Ace and Tanya. And it seems like this season is where the quote-unquote typical Tanya shows up. Apparently, Abram and Coral got close in between last season and this season due to some of the events they were doing together and the tours they're doing together, and they just kind of picked off here where they left off on these tours. Anyways, Snake Pit Poker is the next challenge where they have to grab poker chips and put 175 of them in some sort of holder. The leaders for each team are Theo, Frank, and Brad, and Coral, Arissa, and Cameron, and the latter is complaining that the ladies are taking it too seriously. This challenge is alright and does seem a bit Fear Factor-ish, and you still see some of that left over from last season, and the women, mainly Tanya, keep on getting a bunch of penalties, though Ace and Abe get penalties as well. The guys win the challenge as Coral screwed up on the counting, and Mark is already declaring that the men will win every single challenge this season, and they are pretty close in accomplishing that. The guys talk about how they have to look at past and current performances, and of course, Mark, out of all people, is starting this since it's advantageous to him, while other guys like Eric talks about how it should only be about the current challenge that they just did. The women talk about how Cameron got a DQ for them, but there are a few that are defending her as well. Brad, Theo, and Frank are talking about how Ace and Abraham are the only ones who got penalties, so it's one of those two. And both Cora and Abe are worried about him going home. The woman sent home Cameron and the guy sent home Ace, as he performed poorly on both challenges, where the guy sprayed beer on him. Ace is proud that he didn't get booted first, so getting booted second is an improvement. So I know Ace comes back a few more times after this on both the flagship and All Stars, and I do see a bit more personality here, so I can see why they brought him back, despite having another really poor performance in this season. Cameron was one of the other younger slash newer women who did not like the veterans and made her opinions known, but she wasn't in much of the drama compared to some of the other women. I do see why she got another season just from her limited time here, I guess. We see everyone having fun, and Tanya is kissing any and everyone as she is drinking and dancing her butt off, though she and Theo clearly seemingly hook up in the back of a van. No, that might have been last episode or this episode, but those two are clearly having a repeated thing going on at this point in the season. Kina is talking to Mike about the divide with the newer and older people, and Mike mentions that there are already alliances on the show, despite people saying otherwise. And this is really the start of the quote unquote rookies need to earn their keep mentality. Though you saw a hint of it in prior seasons, it's more clear here. And Mike's pretty much stating what a lot of the veterans, especially the men, don't want to say on the edit or in public. But yeah. And it kind of explains the strategy of not only this season, but especially the other Battle of the Sexes as well. So Tanya and Tina end up going at it over the cell phones, and Tina is over it as she just really goes off on Tanya. And Cora ends up hugging Tina for being the other girl who cusses people off. And it's not just her, since Cora has that reputation. And this is the start of the dislike regarding Tanya and the mean girl trio, which is Rachel, Veronica, and Tina. But it's really Tina versus Tanya that's focused on in this season. So, Melt with You is the next challenge, which we saw on the first Battle of the Sexes, and we saw something like this on, I thought it was Bloodlines, but it's actually Rivals 3, though I think they use soap there instead of ice. Anyways, they have to melt the ice any way possible and grab the cell phone in the ice block. The leaders are Dan, Shane, and Sean, and Kina, Anissa, and Ibis. And them, the woman volunteering is dumb, according to Coral, since a bunch of the newer people are bidding target upon themselves. And a part of me thinks that she already knows that they're going to lose most of the challenges, so volunteering to be leader just isn't the smartest. Of course, we see a bunch of homoerotic content from both sexes, especially with how some of them are laying on one another, they're grinding on the ice, so on and so forth. And they're rubbing all their goodness on the ice to melt it. Overall, it's a really fun challenge, and it's better than the first Battle of the Sexes regarding this challenge, where there, they just sat in one spot there, where Melissa ended up getting hypothermia or something along the lines of that due to it. Unshockingly to no one, the men win the challenge, and the veteran women respect Tanya's performance here. The men decide that Adam needs to go, since he performed poorly in the first challenge, though there's discussion about Mike and Chris, I believe, being gone due to past prior performances. In the women's inner meeting, the veteran women are just bulldozing it over, and Katie is calling out that the newbie women are too scared to do anything. The men boot Adam, despite him doing better today, and it's a sign of the quote-unquote Wookiee treatment. And Kina is booted, since she was not the best leader. Adam and Brad are really pissed off that the veterans can DQ but are safe, and they're referring to Mike. And Adam feels like they are being hypocritical, and there are more discussion about the divide with the women, and the vets are worried that the newbies are outnumbering them. I know Adam and Kina come back for a few more seasons, but neither were the most notable in the season. You definitely do see a sense of their personality with both of them on the season, but they are arguably the rest victims of the quote-unquote rookie treatment on the challenge, and I don't have much else to say. I will give Adam props for being one of the very few people who are visibly upset, and they didn't have this either false or a weak vein of positivity that especially most of the men have when it's their time to go. Though Eric, Mark, and even to a lesser extent, Theo, Dan, and Mike are just using this as a BS excuse to remain in control. Ayana is talking about how cutthroat the women are, and Anissa is a bit apprehensive about Ayana being on the season due to the drama that they had in the past, but it's supposedly water under the bridge, and obviously they're bringing it up here for a reason, and it's clearly foreshadowing. Cora and Abram talk about their showmance and the interracial element of it, where she's shocked that he went for a black woman, since his comments in the past indicated that he was against interracial relationships. Bombs Away is the next challenge where two people from each team have to go up and have to eat a bunch of disgusting food. Mark, Steve, and Chris are the leaders here, and Ayana, Sophia, and Cora are the leaders as well. Where Cora mentions that there is a scapegoat with the woman just in case they lose. So, with her saying that, it shows that the woman had a strategy with this in regard, especially the veteran women. So they intentionally chose people to be leaders or pressured them to volunteer to be leaders. And that's something that we will see, especially with them, throughout the next several episodes. Overall, it's a fun enough eating challenge, but it's nowhere near the best eating challenge that the show has seen or will see after this. During the puzzle part, Ayana is trying to get the women together, but none of them are listening to one another. Ibis and Cole are arguing with Iana after they lost against the guys, and it's now 4-0 when it comes to wins for the guys and losses against the women. Abram and Mike are in trouble since they DQ'd, where Abram has two, but Mike is, I think they said Mike has two DQs, but he might have one. I don't really know the specific amount, but both of them are performing pretty poorly. Both Mike and Abram are worried, and with the women, they talk about how Ayana does not listen to other people despite being a good competitor, where it is Anisha pushing this, hence the segment in the beginning. And honestly, it just seems like they're just pushing Ayana to be very aggressive in this element, though she's just doing what she thinks is right for the team, and there are others who are just as aggressive, but they're never really called out. But anyways, a lot of the other women agree with Anissa's sentiments in this regard. Abram is voted out by the guys, and Cora is actually shocked by this, and Ayana is voted out by the girls, and Shirley has a breakdown over this. And people just think Ayana is too much of a ticking time bomb, and they think that, or they say that this would have been a great acting role for her, but she isn't acting, and that's the problem. Ayana and Anissa go at it after Ayana puts her silhouette on Anissa's bed, and Anissa thinks that Ayana is trying to make her feel bad and trying to guilt trip her. Cora and Abram end up having a somber goodbye with one another. Ayana definitely bought the drama during her limited time, but you could tell that she was maybe not equipped to handle the challenge overall, so I see why this was her last flagship season, though she does return to All Stars almost 2 decades later, though she was almost invisible or given an under the radar edit before her boot episode. Abram had a pretty quiet season, which is definitely odd for him, and the only notable thing about him was his shocking showmance with Coral. But even that wasn't as dynamic as you thought it would be, especially if you look at their interactions last season. The guys are working out, and despite drinking, Derek is still a competitor, though people are seeing him as a loose cannon. Frank and Angela are kind of flirting with one another, and the other women are annoyed with Angela not being a competitor. Junk Boat is the challenge where they have to go through a bunch of junk to make their boat and then sail on a boat to go through some buoys. Ruthie, Robin, and Veronica end up being the leader, though the veterans, like Coral and Veronica, tried to pressure Angela into volunteering, which she did initially, only for her to change her mind. Clearly, she realized that they were trying to set her up here, kind of like how Coral mentioned that was the strategy in the last episode, where Mike, Derek, and Randy are the leaders for the men here. Derek gets DQ'd because I think he touched the girl's junk or something along the lines of that, which put him on the line for the guys since he broke a rule. The challenge is okay and really isn't that notable, especially compared to other challenges in this vein. The girls win their first challenge, and the girls are already talking about how Angela is gone, and they didn't even leave the challenge yet. Mike thinks that he's going to get voted out, since Derek won them a prior challenge, and Angela knows that she is a goner, or at least that's what she thinks. The guys talk about how Derek gave them 2 DQs and not knowing the rules to the challenge, though Robin brings up about how Cynthia never wants to be a leader, which is something that Cynthia outright stated. Angela is complaining to someone on the phone about her predicament, but the guys boot Derek and the girls boot Cynthia. Tina and Cole immediately pop off and snap at the leaders, and we have Cynthia, Anissa, and Tina ranting in the house about the bullshit decision. Though Ruthie claims in the confessional that she's doing what is best for the team, since Cynthia won't put in her all. Robin justifies her decision, and the women continue arguing about all of this, though none of it's really interesting. And everyone realizes, or they're coming to the realization that winning the challenge is starting to destroy their union, though they clearly were never that unified anyways. Cynthia herself really wasn't interesting or offered much of anything in the season, and she said that she wasn't going to try her best, so she wasn't in it as much. It just seemed like the challenge, or at least, yeah, because the first season wasn't seen as the challenge in this point of time, and the challenge overall just wasn't for her, and we wouldn't see her outside of her one All Stars episode. Derek is someone who definitely showed a lot of promise and potential in the season regarding how he performed on the challenges, but the rookie treatment started here, and he was on the outs due to his different mindset compared to the other challengers. Honestly, he was more interesting on his earlier seasons, so seeing how he evolved or devolved from a character point of view will be interesting to watch. Frank speaks to Angela about how she should handle her team, and she spends time with the guys. Eric and some of the other guys are talking about how the leaders decide everything, and Mike is worried about his performance this season, and realizing that he is on the chopping block, and there's only so much that his veteran privilege can give him. High Noon is the challenge, where they use paintballs to shoot their opponents, and the leaders are Randy, Eric, and Brad, and Erisa, Tanya, and Angela. We have the gender sharing or shading one another about their poor aim, and it's pretty funny commentary from the likes of Theo and Tina especially. Mike is tired of his DQ from the first challenge being brought up again by a lot of the guys, and he knows that he is in danger. The men win the challenge, which is par for the course with the season, and it gives Mike some more time. Ibis thinks that Tanya should go over Angela due to performing poorly, and you see the veterans defending Tanya against Angela. Sean is booted by the guys, and Angela is booted by the girls. Both of them are one season wonders, but I do feel like Angela could have brought a lot more to the show if given another challenge, since drama kind of just followed her wherever she went, but she didn't really care for the game and had a defeatist attitude with everything, so it's probably for the best, and a friendship with Frank was nice enough. Sean really was not memorable under any circumstance, and he got left in the shadow, so I'm not shocked he never came back. Powell, Veronica, and Rachel are talking about how they are running the house and the newbies bit more than they could chew, and we see Ibis, Anissa, and Kitty plotting on the three of them, especially with Rachel's nasty ass attitude, which has been a theme throughout the season. Shane talks about his coming out story, and he feels good about Nick being in the house, since he's not the only gay person in the house, which is still a huge issue with the challenge specifically 20 years later. And he talked about how on all of his prior seasons on this show, and I think his rodeo seasons, he was the only one. The next challenge is called Feller Up, which involves chewing and spitting out a bunch of bugs and worms off one of their teammates' body, which is, I think, Coral. It's actually Orissa, now that I'm double checking it, and Mark, where they have to spit it out on a tube, and it's just revolting to watch, and it's beyond gross, and I just get queasy watching it. Anyways, Eric, Frank, and Nick are the leaders for the guys, and Rachel, Sophia, and Tanya are the leaders for the women. The men talk about how Miz has a loss and a DQ, but the Miz hasn't performed this season, though he did well on the last challenge. Eric is trying to protect him, and to me, it is clear that Mike is a part of a Vet Alliance, but he doesn't want to show his hand. Apparently, on the reunion that I can't access anywhere and isn't accessible anywhere but from people who watched it in the past, apparently the veterans like an Eric and a Mark eventually did admit there that Mike was a part of their alliance, and they tried to use veteran privilege to cover for him, but he continued performing poorly, so they eventually had to get rid of him. So there's discussion between Rachel and Tanya and a lot of the newer women about voting out Rachel, where the veterans are voting out Tanya because Tanya has performed poorly throughout the season. Coral calls out the alliance of the newbies since they are calling out the alliance between Coral, Veronica, and Rachel. Mike and Rachel are voted out, and Coral is feeling odd about Mike going home this early, especially since a lot of the stronger people are gone now, and this is going to be her first time in the challenge, really, without him. Rachel tries to repeat her quote from her elimination on Battle of the Exes 1, but it's just nowhere near as good, and she's clearly just being hyperbolic about it. We do see Shane and Nick dancing around and grinding on one another, which is how the episode ends. This is a very under the radar and disappointing performance from Miz, from a character and competitive point of view. Though he wasn't given an under the radar edit at all, since he still got all the content. And while he was hamming up the Miz stuff at times, but his worst season is better than a lot of people's best seasons, though apparently he is preparing for the WWE ad run this time, which affected his performance, so we're at the beginning of the end for him, getting his time on the challenge. Rachel definitely came off as more bitchy, mean, and going out of her way to be more intimidating this season, which was definitely kind of entertaining, but you can tell that they're setting her up specifically for a downfall from the very beginning of the season. But she didn't really get into like conflicts, or her conflicts were just very like passive aggressive instead of it being like outright arguments and fights. The guys host Chris a bachelor party since he's getting married in 2 days. What a weird thing to do, a challenge while having a marriage date during the time that you know that they're filming and you choosing to do a season knowing that it's going to conflict with your wedding date. And Arisa is ready to do anything, while Katie knows that she isn't the best, but she could win the season since she won last season. Chris literally leaves to get married, gets his honeymoon, and then comes back in 48 hours. Veronica is still reading about Rachel's elimination, and Tina does not want to vote for Tanya again, which is odd, or maybe I'm getting that incorrectly since Tina and Tanya are feuding the entire season, but whatever. Cora mentions that Tanya was DQ'd several times, while one DQ that Rachel had throughout the season that didn't even make a difference regarding the outcome of the challenge was used against Rachel, and it's not fair. The next challenge is called So Wing. Sorry, I forgot to mention that Katie kind of orchestrated or helped orchestrate Rachel's demise, and we'll see how that affects her here. Anyways, the next challenge is called So Wing, where you have to go from one rope to another above the ocean, and we've seen challenges like this in several variations in the future after the season. The leaders are Brad, Shane, and Theo, and Ibis, Katie, and Ruthie. A group of people are seen as strong, or who are seen as strong, so people like Eric and Ruthie drop, and only a few people compete the challenge. So people like Coral, Tina, Sophia, Veronica, Robin, Mark, Thea, Brad, Steven, and Dan. And Arisa initially refuses to do the challenge, though she ends up changing her mind, though it doesn't make a difference regarding the result of the challenge. The men win because they were quicker, despite it being relatively close. Chris tells everyone that he wants to go home after coming back, since he just got married and he should spend time with his wife. And I felt like he should have done this, I don't know, before agreeing to do the season. And none of the guys are really feel any type of way about it. And they don't care to discuss about it any further. And they're just going to celebrate him. Tina talks about how Katie did the poorest in the challenge. The Robin and Tanya talk about how Ruthie needs to go, since Katie is at least improving. Sorry, Tina mentioned that Katie was doing poorly the entire season. The men sent home Chris, and the woman sent home Katie. The woman actually ended up giving Katie a nice somber goodbye, which was a refreshing experience compared to her prior seasons. Chris was essentially invisible on all the episodes but the last one he was on, where he left to get married, came back, and realized that he should go. He doesn't offer anything to the show, and it's not shocking that he never came back. Katie made a big move in splitting up the Rachel, Veronica, Coral alliance and didn't really get into any drama this season, but it seemed like she was more well liked this time around. She was kind of enjoyable and made some interesting game moves, so I think we saw a different side of her this season. Veronica and Coral are talking about how they like Sophia, and Ruthie hears the two women talking trash about her, which they of course deny, and they aren't even being slick about it. Ruthie would appreciate it if they just said it to her face instead of behind her back, and Coral says, I didn't say anything. I would say it to your face if I did. Cora is being very two-faced here, and it's not a good look on her part. We see Robin and Mark getting close and becoming a showman, and I guess he got divorced between the last Battle of the Sexes and this Battle of the Sexes, which is why I was so shocked when he mentioned he was married there, because I knew his storylines in the future, and what he mentioned and what he doesn't mention, and the wife never really came up. And this would obviously be important during their next few seasons regarding their story and their challenge trajectory. The challenge is called Electroshock, which is pretty self explanatory, or you think it would be self explanatory. Anyways, the Challenge consists of them moving a pole throughout a path, and all of them are holding this pole, but if you touch a wall, you will be shocked. And it's kind of extreme, to be honest, but other shows have done challenges like this anyways, so I guess it's not that bad. Anissa, Coral, and Robin are the leaders of the women, and Dan, Randy, and Steven are the leaders for the men. Coral is giving them instructions, but people like Robin and Ruthie are annoyed with how demanding Coral is, and Sophie is mentioning in the confessional that the women in the back aren't even touching the pole, due to the way, I guess, too many bodies and the way the pole moves. Of course, the men win yet again, and the women are very defeated at this point. Steven calls out the woman for being weak in the confessional that he's doing. You know, the type of confessionals where you do it in the crime scene and the camera just pops up on you and you tell them your feelings, not in a control room. So the woman, especially Sophia and Coral, call him out about this, and it's just not a very good look on his part. Some other challengers see through Coral's pep talk where she's doing it because she knows she's screwed up and she's definitely in danger. The three guys talk about Nick and Shade when it comes to performance, so one of them is going. None of Robin, Coral, and Anissa feel safe, and we finally get to the elimination where Anissa and Nick are voted out, and both of them give positive speeches. We then end the episode with Robin and Mark getting closer to one another, and they are seemingly on a date with one another where he's talking about wooing her parents and all that jazz. Anissa was definitely more memorable on this season compared to her last, and her first season technically, as she is more involved in the drama in comparison, and I think she wasn't as shy and as muted as she was in the past. I really don't have anything to say about Nick other than his friendship with Shane was very nice, but it is a shocking that he's a one and done, because it kind of seemed like he was edited to uplift Shane's storyline and arc. Anya and Theo are talking, and it seems like he's getting a bit annoyed with her. We learn about Eric and his jump rope, where he's just swinging it and is using it as a tool to get people to talk in the team meetings. And I've learned through research that he did this because he was a brand ambassador for some company that did skipping ropes, and it's just annoying as hell to watch. And the show kind of props it up as some iconic moment based on some countdowns they did well after the season. Pop Culture Bike Ramp is the challenge where they have to ride certain ramps. The more difficult, the more points you get, but you have to do it successfully, and then you ask questions where you get more points. Oh, sorry, you're asked questions where you get more points. Tina, Arissa, and Sophia, as well as Brad, Frank, and Theo, are the leaders for each team, and the woman wins the challenge, though the pop culture one was obviously going to lean towards the woman. Duh. Theo and Brad were performing better according to the guys, so it's clear that Frank is going, despite him also being a strong competitor as well. I'm pretty sure another reason that they are not stating here is that he is also a rookie. The leaders of the women are discussing who to boot, and Tanya is worried, so she campaigns to the leaders. After she leaves, they mention that Veronica also got some DQs as well. Frank and Veronica are voted out of the house, and the girls have a meeting where Tanya campaigns, which causes her and Coral to argue, since most of the women see through Tanya doing this because she knows that she is low on the list, and she is probably going to be booted next. Where Tina ends up adding her 2 cents into the meta, and Tina is yelling her ass off. Frank is not as memorable as he will be in The Gauntlet 3, but I did like how he supported Angela throughout her turbulent time in the house, but he was cool enough here. Veronica was definitely more subdued in the season, and was not as strong in the challenges, but seeing her fight with her back against the wall with Cora and Rachel was kind of neat overall, where it's officially established that she is one of the villains of this era of the show. At this point, Tanya feels attacked by everyone in the house, and after ranting to Ibis, who doesn't give a crap about the situation at all, Tanya really is not doing herself any favors and is just continuously digging herself a hole. The shredder is the mission where 6,000 pounds, that's probably exaggerated, of crappy food will go into a shredder, and they have to catch it in the buckets that are on their head. The leaders are Shane, Mark, and Eric for the men, and all of the women are kind of avoiding being the leader and aren't apprehensive about it, since they've been on a losing streak all season and they know that increases the chances of them going home. But Robin, Ibis, and Ruthie are the leaders for the women. This challenge is inherently gross, and I want to throw up just looking at it, but of course the men win this one, to the shock of no one. The men talk about how Randy has, like, he's just not performing well, while Shane and Brad don't have a DQ or a poor performance. And the women have a meeting, though some of them are discussing getting rid of Ebis. The two people who are voted out are Randy and Ebis, with the latter telling them to boot Tanya. So I guess that's why they showed that scene of Tanya talking to Ebis in the beginning of the episode, as some sort of foreshadowing. So the episode ends with Ruthie realizing that she needs to actually strategize to keep up with the other woman, though I don't really think she ends up doing it on the rest of the season. I don't remember a thing about Randy during the season, but a part of that is because the men in general are so boring. Apparently, he comes back for another season, which is shocking, so hopefully he does more there. Ebis is someone that I liked throughout the season. She was on the side with the other newbies, and she wasn't whining like some of the other newbies here. So there's definitely some potential there, though she's kind of just middle of the road overall, so I do get why she's on future seasons. Things are going south with Tanya and Theo, to the point where she's laying on the road, and he, as well as Coral, have to escort her to their truck, and it's very clear that nothing's going to happen with them after the season. Cast a Spell is the next challenge, where they cannot speak to one another throughout the challenge, and they have to choose a letter to spray on a teammate, where the sprayed teammates have to create a word, but you can't repeat words. This challenge is pretty interesting in my opinion. The leaders are Ruthie, Cora, and Tanya, and Shane, Theo, and Dan. Steven starts whispering, and Shane tells him that he almost cost them a DQ, and Steven ends up hitting Shane because Shane grabs his arm. Like, he kind of like slaps him in the face or like mushes it. Shane immediately tries to downplay it when Steven is DQ'd, but the rules are the rules. Steven ends up writing an apology to Shane and all the other guys before he leaves, and the guys win yet again. Since a guy went home already during the round, no one needs to go from them, and it's just the girls who has to decide who is going home. Ruthie and Tanya know that one of them is going home, and Tina's hate on is pushing for Tanya to go home, so it's no shocker when Tanya does go home. Theo and Tanya have a goodbye cuddle, though he also just makes it clear that this will be it for them and nothing's going to happen afterwards. So it's clearly just a showment of convenience due to them being isolated and stuck in this environment. Honestly, Steve was pretty under-edited during the season, but he did come off like a jerk during the few times he was shown, with the rant against the woman and the random slap for a situation that didn't warrant it, even outside of the violence. Since they've brought people back who were violent, he didn't bring anything to the show, so I'm fine with him being a one-season wonder. So with this season, Tanya is becoming the Tanya that everyone associates her with regarding the fans and the alumni, but she wasn't performing very well in the season, despite her lasting longer than she did in either of her seasons before this. She did get into her fair share of drama, and this is the start of the woman really disliking her, which will be a huge thing regarding her career, but at least she becomes memorable here, when she was kind of just there in her other seasons. Robin and Mark are snuggling in the bed and they see one another as a break from the season and the game, so their bond's just getting closer and closer and closer. The challenge is called Semi-Cross, where there's an obstacle truck amongst the three trailers that is moving, or above the three trailers that are moving, and we've seen a variance of this challenge several times in the season since, and it's pretty common in the more modern seasons. Brad, Dan, and Mark are the leaders of the men, or for the men, and Robin, Sophia, and Tina are the leaders for the women. Cole is really pissed off at Robin for performing poorly, where she tells Mark to say goodbye to his little girlfriend, which annoys Mark, but he isn't going to fight anyone, so he walks off. Tina is also really pissed off, and we see Coral and Robin arguing because if she can't handle this, she can't handle the final, and that's Coral's rhetoric, and Robin, of course, cries to her boyfriend and calls Coral a bitch. And Eric is tired of Coral berating people, so he decides to get involved and yells at Coral. So the two of them are going back and forth about how awful she is. One, it isn't even Eric's girlfriend, and I don't know why he's getting booked all of a sudden when Mark, the actual boyfriend of Robin, isn't arguing with her. At least it shows Eric has some confrontationalness in him, but I feel like that might have been the case if I remember correctly. The one fight in season one might have involved him, but he just doesn't show that side to him much at all. Arisa is refusing to do the challenge initially as she's getting more frustrated, and Tina and Coral are getting frustrated too, but Arisa does end up doing it. And I feel like she's done this in at least one other challenge. Anyways, to no one's surprise, the men win yet again, and the boys come to the conclusion that Shane needs to go, where the women talk about if Robin deserves another chance or not. The men boot Shane, which is apparently ironic because Mark saved Shane on the first battle of the sexes during a round where Shane was supposed to go home, and Robin is sent home by the girls. Of course, we see a schmoozy goodbye with Robin and Mark, where they're kissing up on one another before he takes her to her vehicle and she's driven off. Shane definitely holds his own as a competitor, and he has a few more moments in the season where he's a lot more memorable and likable here compared to his other seasons where he was somewhat forgettable there, but he definitely stood out more here. Robin is one of the better newbies, as she didn't really whine about playing the game like the others, was solid enough in the challenge, and had her romance with Mark. I know what happens to her in the future, so it will be something watching that journey take place over the rewatch. Mark and Eric are talking about how they've always been close, strategically and personally, so everyone knew where they stood when it comes to their relationship and in the game, and they're debating about who between Theo or Dan will be in their final three. And Brad is getting along with everyone, not realizing that he is on the outs because he is a newbie. Ruthie and Sophia seemingly also know that they are on the outs with their team. The challenge is called Car Go, where they have to put suitcases into a car and pull the car into the air, which I think is a decent enough challenge, kind of middle of the road, in my opinion. So Eric and Mark are trying to con their way into getting Eric into the leadership, since Eric knows that he is number 5 when it comes to performance, and based on the quota that they said, he should be going home today. Where Brad initially states that he should be the leader, but then he reneges due to the pressure. To absolutely no one's surprise, the men win. Obviously, because they have more muscle, where they are pulling up a car filled with suitcases, so obviously they're going to do better. Tina and Ruthie end up arguing, but Tina is just complaining instead of explaining what went wrong with them in the challenge. The men talk about how Brad needs to go, and Brad feels bad because he should have been a leader, which he wanted, but they are sandbagging him because he is a newbie. It is either Tina or Ruthie, and Tina is tired of hearing about Ruthie being this huge player, but she isn't delivering. Coral argues with Sophia about how it would not be smart to take two friends to the end, i.e., Sophia and Ruthie, since it weakens her chance of winning. Brad and Ruthie are voted out of the house, and it's one of the more emotional votes of the season, since Brad is pissed off. He realizes that he's being sandbagged, and Eric admits in the confessional that he was being sandbaggy, and it's not just about playing fair. And Brad shouldn't have let him get into the leader circle. Brad didn't have a whole lot of moments in the season on a character point of view, but he's one of the few rookies who was able to keep up with the veterans, so I see why he came back, and it'll be interesting seeing his journey. Ruthie set such a high standard for herself from her last season, so despite making it very far here, as she was only booted 2 rounds before the finale, people see her performance as a disappointment. She doesn't have a big personality, and she really isn't strategizing, so the novelty is starting to wear off in my opinion. Orissa has not performed well throughout the season, so the woman wants to get rid of her at this point. We see Mark and Eric talk about how they're going to do whatever they can to get one another to the final, and apparently both of them are going through a lot outside of the house. Apparently, through some research, Eric might have been homeless before this season, so it adds some context to what happens in this episode. And then we also see Mock talking about throwing in the towel to make sure that Eric gets to the final. And the guys are talking about throwing the challenge, since they realize that Arissa is weak and they want her to stick around. The challenge is called Vertigo, where they have to walk across a beam, and the team leaders are Arissa and Coral and Mark and Theo, though Dan wants Eric to go home at this point, since he's the weakest. And I also forgot to mention that he felt like this even from the last episode. And this is where they should have realized that they were being gypped. Mark discusses with the guys that because they know that Arissa is weak and the woman wants to boot Arissa, he talks about them throwing the challenge so Arissa can be in the final so the men have a better chance of winning. They don't show this, but Mark always cuts deals with people on seasons to share the prize money, whether he's in the finals or not, especially since the prize money for the first half of the show, or already the first 3 quarters of the show, wasn't really much, especially compared to the last quarter of the show. So the women don't even know about the men throwing the challenge, and the women end up winning the penultimate challenge. It's between Tina or Sophia regarding the boot, and Mark essentially throws the towel, since Eric missed the final on the first battle of the sexes, and he wants Eric to make it to the final and win. Despite winning season 1, though at the time it apparently wasn't considered season 1 at the time, and it was added to the flagship challenge many years after this. Mark still thinks that season 2 is the first challenge season, so his sentiment hasn't changed even up until a few years ago regarding which season is the first challenge season. Anyways, Tina is frustrated that it is her day since she's a good competitor but might be a bit too tense for the others, or too intense for some of the others. Tina and Mark are voted out of the game. Tina really stood out in the season and was one of the few women who had some spice on the season. It was also one of her better performing seasons as a competitor, and her personality really added some humor to the season, so I'm looking forward to seeing her journey continue. I think this is the first season where Mark had some sort of a storyline, with his romance with Robin, which will definitely make an imprint on his next few seasons. You can tell that he has personality, but his strategy is so boring. But I do think that it's honorable what he did for Eric, but he cared more about getting the money from dealings than the title, where he easily could have been a 3-time champion had he just not done that. The men feel very secure in their win, and the women are trying to keep up a positive attitude despite the trajectory of the season. The final 6 have dinner, and we see Eric and Coral make up, and they all have a nice toast with one another, as the two got into a little tiff a few episodes ago. A bunch of people in black outfits and ski masks take them to what would be the start of the final, which is called Escape from Santa Fe, where they are taken into some dark room. They are there until the next morning and are taken to another location before going on a plane and jumping off the plane. They have to crawl underneath a barbed wire to get a key, and they get some GPS where they have to go to a destination, and they look under a needle in a haystack for the final key slash destination, which is a matching puzzle situation of clues. For an early season, this final is pretty solid in my opinion. To the shock of absolutely no one, the men win the season. I don't have much to say about Sophia or Arissa to be honest, as both of them were relatively under-edited. Arissa seemed a bit more like a mess with how she handled certain challenges and was just weaker overall, and Sophia was relatively middle of the road to overall, which is bordering on under the radar. Hold up, I didn't realize that they were both on All Stars until I looked it up, and my memory has been completely jogged. Anyways, Ursa has not changed at all from what I remember on All Stars. Coral remained an icon throughout the season as she had a decent amount of drama in the season. She's really portrayed as the villain veteran here, and she performed pretty well in the season, but it's arguably her most forgettable season just due to the format. But it was interesting seeing her as the bona fide leader. I think my thing with Eric is that I don't have the context for his real world season to see the full importance or essence of his character, since it is the very first one, but he was a bit more involved in the season as a character. And I guess this is a good way for him to go out the franchise, but he just simply put lacks the charisma of a Mark. Theo is still a very good competitor here this season, and he had some funny moments, as well as his showman slash nomance with Tanya, but it wasn't one of his more interesting seasons, and I just think that's the case with everyone here. So in prior seasons, I confused him with the other Dan, though in hindsight, the other Dan is a lot more interesting. This one is a good competitor, but I honestly don't really remember a damn thing about him outside of that. And he ended his career on a good but bland note. So I'm kind of glad that he never came back since he just offers nothing. Alright, so in conclusion, this season was kind of just a miss. They made such great progression with the last 2 seasons prior to this, but they decided to get rid of the eliminations and went back to the Battle of the Sexes format. But the issue is, With this cast being a good cast on paper, a lot of them just didn't deliver, and the formatting was even worse on this season than it was on the prior Battle of the Sexes. I also think a lot of the people on this cast became pseudo influencers regarding the fact that their tours meant more to them than the show, and the show was just their way of promoting their tours where they got a lot of their money from. So I'm wondering if that's why a lot of them are on their best behavior here. And in general, the friendly summer camp vibe just wasn't going to last a lot longer since reality TV in general just changed and got more tense after the mid 2000s. And you can definitely tell that there needed to be a shift, and a decent amount of the people on this cast and even from this era were moving on to bigger and better things, whether it was creating their own families, changing career paths, and all that stuff. So it's very clear that we're at an end of an era. So this is the last season that isn't on streaming platforms, and I had to rewatch most of the seasons of season 1 to 9 twice. So now that I'm gotten that out of the way, it will be interesting to watch season 10 since I haven't watched that in almost a year. And from that point onwards, it'll be about a year, sometimes over a year, depending on the season. Anyways, this season really just doesn't hit, and it's definitely on the lower end when it comes to the seasons from this era. It's probably higher than the first four seasons, but that's probably it. Anyways, I don't really have much else to say. It'll be interesting to see how this era closes out with season 10, and then I'll do a whole era one breakdown. That might be a video or a live. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with other stuff soon. Bye!